and study so that we can be better prepared to be a part of the kingdom which is soon to be established. We'll begin today's study where we're looking at one true movement by reading a quotation from Great Controversy, page 609.1.
Different periods in the history of the church have each been marked by the development of some special truth adapted to the necessities of God's people at that time. Every new truth has made its way against hatred and opposition. Those who were blessed with its light were tempted and tried. The Lord gives a special truth for the people in emergence who dare refuse to publish it.
Right, so many of us have come to realize this fundamental truth that in every age, in every generation, there's a special truth which God gives to us to guide us as to his requirements for that time. What people don't understand that besides the truth for that generation, our salvation very much depends on how we relate to the bearers of that truth, or in other words, the messengers in that particular generation. The Bible is full of examples of people who learned in the Old Testament and even in the New Testament of the truth for their time and the benefits of how they related to the message bearers of the time. Let's take a look at Israel of old. Shall we read from Genesis chapter 15, verse 13 and 14?
Verse 13. And he said unto Abraham, know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterward shall they come out with great substance.
So I'm sure we're familiar with this assurance which was given to Abraham that his children, his great-grandchildren would be bondmen in the land of Egypt, but after a set time they would be allowed to go free and God would give them all the land of Canaan. And true to that promise, the time came and God raised up the man Moses to fulfill that commission. Shall we read what happened in Exodus chapter 3 from some selected verses?
Verse 2. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed. And the Lord said, and you have surely seen the affliction of my people which are in Egypt, and have heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. And I am come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of the land, unto a good land and a large, unto a land flowing with milk and honey, unto the place of the Canaanites, and the Hittites, and the Amorites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Come now therefore, and I will send thee unto Pharaoh, that thou mayest bring forth my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt.
So these are not new stories to many of us. We are aware of the commission of Moses to go and set the people of God free from the land of Egypt, from the hands of the Egyptians, from the hand of Pharaoh. What we're trying to establish here is what was the message of their time, the emergent message, and also who were the bearers of that message. And we've seen that the message was to leave Egypt and go and possess the land of Canaan. And we've seen that the people, the message bearers, were the 12 tribes at the time, together with their God-appointed leader, who was Moses. Well, we all know that Pharaoh failed to recognize this as a heaven-sent message. What did he say in Exodus chapter 5, verse 2?
Verse 2. And Pharaoh said, who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice to let Israel go? I know not the Lord, neither will I let Israel go.
So to Pharaoh, the message didn't mean anything. But interesting enough that some of the subjects in Egypt realized that this was the work of God. Exodus 10, verse 7.
And Pharaoh's servants said unto him, how long shall this man be a snare unto us? Let the men go, that they may serve the Lord their God. Knowest thou not yet that Egypt is destroyed?
So some realized the power of God in the message, and Pharaoh unfortunately did not. And we know what the end result was. There were many plagues which fell upon the people of Egypt, And the final one, they lost the firstborn in every household. After that, some who had learnt the power and the importance of attaching themselves to the message of the time took opportunity when the time came to leave to join the Israelites. And the record is in Exodus 12, verse 38.
Verse 38. And a mixed multitude went up also of them, and flocks and herds, even every much cattle.
So when the time came to leave, it wasn't only the Israelites who left, but those who realized that this was a heaven-sent message and this was the true movement, they joined themselves to this movement and they traveled with them to also be a part of the inheritance of the promised land. After the plagues and the incident of the Red Sea, the nations who were around feared Israel, and they understood that they were led by the one true God. But did the knowledge of this benefit everyone? We shall see. Let's read in Joshua chapter 2 from verse 9.
Verse 9. And she said unto the men, I know that the Lord hath given you the land, and that your terror is fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land faint because of you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when he came out of Egypt, and what he did unto 2 kings of the Amorites that were on the other side Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. Verse 11. And as soon as we had heard these things, our hearts did melt, neither did there remain any more courage in any man because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and in earth beneath.
These are the words of Rahab the harlot, and she's speaking on behalf of herself as well as the rest of the inhabitants of the land of Jericho, that when they heard all these things that God had done, their hearts melted with fear. And because their hearts melted, what did she do? Shall we read on from verse 12?
Verse 12. Now therefore, I pray you, swear unto me by the Lord, since I have shewed you kindness, that you also shew kindness unto my father's house, and give me a true token. And that you will save alive my father, my mother, and my brethren, and my sisters, and all that they have, and deliver our lives from death. And the men answered her, Our life for yours, if ye utter not this our business. And it shall be, when the Lord hath given us the land, that we will do kindly and truly with thee.
So we see while the rest of the inhabitants feared Israel, they opted just to live in that fear and do nothing about it. But Rahab took advantage of the visit of the spies, and she made concession for her own life and for that of her family, and her request was not fruitless. What happened later on when the Israelites came once again in Joshua chapter 6 from verse 17?
And the seed shall be accursed, even it, all that are therein to the Lord. Only Rahab the harlot shall live, she and all that are with her in the house, because she hid the messengers that were sent. And the young men that were spies went in and brought out Rahab and her father and her mother and her brethren and all that she had, and they brought out all her kindred and left them without the camp of Israel. And Joshua saved Rahab the harlot alive, and her father's household, and all that she had, and she dwelleth in Israel even unto this day, because she hid the messengers which Joshua sent to spy out Jericho.
So Rahab was wise in that she spotted the winning side, and she made efforts to align herself to that movement, and it saved not only her, but all of her household, while the rest of Jericho opted to live in fear, and they didn't take advantage of the opportunity to submit themselves and be a part of the winning movement. At about that time, we'll take a look at another nation as well. This is the nation of the Gibeonites. Shall we read from Joshua chapter 9, verse 3?
And when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done unto Jericho and to Ai, they did work willingly, and went and made as if they had been ambassadors, and took old sacks upon their asses, and wine bottles, old and rent and bound up, and old shoes and clotted upon their feet, and old garments upon them, and all the bread of their provision was dry and milled. And they went to Joshua unto the camp at Gilgal, and said unto him and to the men of Israel, We be come from a far country, now therefore make ye a league with us.
So the Gibeonites realized that there was a true movement of the day, and in order to preserve their lives, and their safety and secure their salvation, they quickly aligned themselves to that movement of the day. Unfortunately, they opted to use false representations, but their motive was good, in that they chose to align themselves to the true movement of the day. Shall we read from Patriarchs and Prophets, page 505.2, where it says, In their far-off home,
professedly beyond the limits of Palestine, their fellow countrymen, they said, had heard of the wonders which God had brought for his people, and had sent them to make a league with Israel. The Gibeonites were permitted to live, but were attached as bondmen to the sanctuary to perform all manner of services. Joshua made them that day hewers of wood and drawers of water for the congregation and for the altar of the Lord. This condition they gratefully accepted, conscious that they had been at fault and glad to purchase life on any terms. Behold, we are in thine hand, they said to Joshua. As it seemeth good and right unto thee to do unto us, do. For centuries their descendants were connected with the service of the sanctuary.
So we see that though they made that error of coming in a deceptive form, they sought to spare their lives, and they benefited in that. They were saved from the destruction which was going on of all the nations around them. So we see that it doesn't begin now that there's ever been a true movement, and those who choose to align themselves definitely benefit. Shall we cross over into the New Testament era and see if God still worked in that same manner? Shall we read in the book of Acts, chapter 10, from verse 1 going onwards?
There was a certain man in Caesarea called Cornelius, a centurion of the band called the Italian band, a devout man, and one that feared God with all his house, which gave much alms to the people and prayed to God always. He saw in a vision, evidently about the 9th hour of the day, an angel of God coming into him and saying unto him, Cornelius.
Right, so there we have this gentleman Cornelius, who was a gentleman, a centurion, and we know back in those days they were shut out from the commonwealth of blessings, but he acted faithfully according to his understanding of the truth, and God saw it fit to draw him closer to the way of truth. But note that the angel doesn't tell him about Jesus. The angel says to him in Acts chapter 10, verse 4.
Verse 4. And when he looked on him, he was afraid and said, What is it, Lord? He said unto him, Thy prayers and thine alms are come up for a memorial before God. And now send men to Joppa, and call for one Simon, whose surname is Peter. He lodged with one Simon a tanner, whose house is by the seaside. He shall tell thee what thou oughtest to do.
And as you know, Peter was amongst the pioneers of the Christian movement in the day. So the angel came to Cornelius and didn't tell him to receive Jesus and be baptized, but directed him to find those members who were already part of the movement at that time to give him instruction on what he should do further. And we see how the Lord works in every generation, honoring, exalting those who respect the messengers of the time. Meanwhile, Peter also received a vision directing him on what to do with Cornelius. So when they finally met, shall we read in Acts chapter 10, verse 24 and see what happened?
And the morrow after they entered into Caesarea, and Cornelius waited for them, and had called together his kinsmen and near friends. And as he talked with him, he went in and found men that were come together. Therefore came I unto you without gainsaying. As soon as I was sent for, I asked therefore for what intent ye have sent for me. And Cornelius said, 4 days ago I was fasting until this hour. And at the 9th hour I prayed in mine house, and behold, a man stood before me in bright clothing. Immediately, therefore, I sent to thee, and thou hast well done that thou art come. Now, therefore, are we all here present before God to hear all things that are commanded thee of God? Then Peter opened his mouth and said, Of a truth I perceive that God is no respecter of persons. The word which God sent unto the children of Israel, preaching peace by Jesus Christ, he is Lord of all. Can any man forbid water, that this should not be baptized, which have received the Holy Ghost as well as we. And he commanded them to be baptized in the name of the Lord. Then prayed they him to tarry certain days.
So we go back. Why didn't the angel just come to Cornelius and tell him about Jesus and tell him about baptism and teach him the truth? Because the church is God's appointed agency for the salvation of men. So it was necessary for Cornelius to be connected to the agency which was working on earth at that time, to the bearers of the message. The church at any given time is the prophet of the hour, together with those who have accepted the message and want to play a part in it. So if anyone would like to benefit from the message of the hour, they have to seek to those very message bearers of that time.
Amen.
Shall we have yet another example? I'm sure we all remember Saul of Tarsus, who was there at the stoning of Stephen, and he played a huge role in the jailing and killing of many of the early Christians. But what happened? Shall we read from Acts chapter 9, verse 1 onwards?
And so, yet breathing out threatenings and slaughter against the disciples of the Lord, went unto the high priest, and desired of him letters to Damascus, to the synagogues, that if he found any of this way, whether they were men or women, he might bring them bound unto Jerusalem. And as he journeyed, he came near Damascus, and suddenly there shined round about him a light from heaven. And he fell to the earth, and heard a voice saying unto him, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? And he said, Who art thou, Lord? And the Lord said, I am Jesus whom thou persecutest. It is hard for thee to kick against the pricks. And he, trembling and astonished, said, Lord, what wilt thou have me to do? And the Lord said unto him, Arise, and go into the city, and it shall be told thee what thou must do.
When Saul asked, What would thou have me do? Once again, we see the same pattern. God didn't tell him directly that this is what I want you to do, Saul, but he sent him again to be connected with the present truth bearers of that time. He sent him to Ananias, who also received a vision on how to attend to Saul. Let's read on from the book of Acts, chapter 9, from verse 10.
And there was a certain disciple at Damascus, named Ananias, and to him said the Lord in a vision, Ananias. And he said, Behold, I am here, Lord. And the Lord said unto him, Arise, and go into the street which is called Straight, and inquire in the house of Judas for one called Saul of Tarsus, for behold, he prayed. And he had seen in a vision a man named Ananias coming in, and putting his hand on him, and that he might receive his sight. Then Ananias answered, Lord, I have heard by men of this man how much evil he hath done to thy saints at Jerusalem. And here he hath authority from the chief priest to bind all that call on thy name. But the Lord said unto him, Go thy way, for he is a chosen vessel unto me, to bear my name before the Gentiles, and kings, and the children of Israel. And Ananias went his way, and entered into the house, and putting his hands on him, said, Brother Saul, the Lord, even Jesus, that appeared unto thee in the way as thou camest, hath sent me, that thou mightest receive thy sight, and be filled with the Holy Ghost. And when he had received meat, he was strengthened. Then was Saul certain days with his disciples, which were at Damascus. And straightway he preached Christ in the synagogues, that he is the Son of God.
Do you realize that it was a very difficult thing to connect Saul with the Christians of the day because of his reputation as a persecutor of the brethren?
Yes.
A simpler means would be for God to just talk to him and say, Go and preach Jesus. But still, the same method was employed of connecting Saul to those who were already in the work at the time. He must be instructed by those ones. Even if he was to rise above them in the message, he must first be instructed by those who were already in the message, the one true movement of the time. So I hope the pattern becomes clear to us that as we seek to be a part of the truth, we have to seek the messenger and seek those who bear the message at the time, and there's no other means by which God can save us. Even Isaiah 11 says to us that the ensign shall be set up, and to it shall the Gentiles seek. This is the method which God has used in all the ages.
Amen.
Jesus illustrates this heavenly setup, this heavenly order in the book of John chapter 10. So we shall go through some of the verses there, and we shall hear the commentary from Inspiration so that we understand how this order works. John chapter 10, verse 1.
10 verse 1. Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that entereth not by the door into the sheepfold, but climbeth up some other way, the same is a thief and a robber.
Right. So we shall hear the commentary from 1 TG 2, 19.2, where it says, do you want to get into the sheepfold?
Do you want to get into the sheepfold? If you do, you must get in through the door. If you gain entrance in some other way, eventually you cast out into outer darkness, there to gnash your teeth. From these alternatives, we all must make our choice.
So the situation is laid plain and bare for us all that entry into the sheepfold is through the door, and those who wish to climb in by any other way will not stay in for long. Let's read further on verse 2 and its commentary.
But he that entereth in by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. In verse 9, Christ said, I am the door. Connect verse 9 with verse 2, and you see that those who enter in through the Lord's way are the only ones whom he acknowledges as shepherds of his flock. The Lord, therefore, implies that they are unauthorized shepherds heading his sheep.
Oh yes, so we see that some people believe that if they grasp one or two precepts of the truth, they can run independently with the truth and they shall also be saved. But we see from this illustration that there is a setup. And from that setup, there's a door. And those who want to be a part of the saving truth must enter in through that door. And if they climb in any other manner, they are unauthorized. Shall we read on verse 3 and the commentary?
To him the porter openeth, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calleth his own sheep by name, and leadeth them out. The porter, the one in charge, opened the door only to those who have complied with the requirements for admission. In other words, the Lord is plainly telling us that no one may dodge the porter's inspection forever, get by. And yet, in spite of this warning, and in spite of the fact that to go through the door is even easier than to climb over the fence, some choose to take a chance stealing their way in, pretending to be in the faith, thus getting into the sheepfold and hoping to take over or to get a following. It is, however, not possible to induce God's true sheep to follow them, for they know the true shepherd's voice.
Oh yes, so it's easier to get in by the door, but still some will prefer to climb over the walls, and unfortunately they come in and pretend to be part of the faith only to disrupt others who are seeking the truth. But we are told that God's true sheep must be able to discern the voice of the true shepherd. Shall we read on in verse 4?
And when he putteth forth his own sheep, he goeth before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. Since these sheep know not faces, but know voices, then those who pay attention to faces and who cannot differentiate between voice and voice are sure to be misled by self-appointed shepherds. But those who give heed only to the voice of truth, are generally led in for shelter and out for green pastures. God's people are not bothered with faces, but they do give earnest heed to God-appointed voices uttering truth.
Yes, we get some people who are worried about faces. And when you worry about faces, you may not like a certain face. And once you don't like that face, it will be difficult to accept the message. That's why in Testimonies Volume 6, page 420, we're encouraged that we should have a clear conception of the truth. And when you have that clear conception, we should respect the messenger and also accept the message. But if we worry about faces, then we are likely not to fall in line with the will of God. And we are likely to be led astray by false shepherds. Shall we read the commentary from verses 5, 8, and 10 as well?
And a stranger will they not follow, but will flee from him, for they know not the voice of strangers. All that ever came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. The thief cometh not, but for to steal, and to kill, and to destroy. I am come that they might have life, and that they might have it more abundantly. God's sheep are thus carefully led in and out, both to shelter and to meet in due season, to present truth. The goats, though, those who dodge the potter while entering, must, of course, do so while coming out too. Consequently, they cannot be led by God's appointed shepherds. Let us turn to John 14 and read part 1 verse.
Okay, so we see that the advantage of going in through the door, of being approved by the porter, of being led by God's true shepherds and not worrying about the faces, is that we'll receive meat in due season and present truth. But on the other hand, if we behave like goats, then we're likely to be shut out eventually from the kingdom. Shall we read from John 14 verse 6?
Verse 6. Jesus said unto him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto Father but by me. From this we see that Jesus is the only way to the kingdom. The idea then that there are many ways, whereas there is but one, Jesus, and that they all lead to the kingdom eternal is only a hum of a humbug that unsanctified hearts like to listen to. They are of those who are dodging the porter at the door, and of those who know that their deeds cannot stand inspection.
Those goats who dodge the porter are the ones who peddle this idea that there are many ways and we'll all meet in the kingdom. Unfortunately, that's not the case, because God has shown us throughout the ages, from the beginning of time, from as way back as the Old Testament, coming through all the ages. In every age where there's a present truth message, there are message bearers. There's the prophet together with those who are willing to bear that message. And there's no other way to be a part of that movement but to accept that messenger and the helpers and the truth which they bear.
Amen.
Shall we read the comment? That's 1 TG 222.1. As there is but one right way.
As there is but one right way and but one door, and as all Christians do not see alike and do not walk together, could it be that we are all wrong? All going in a wrong direction? No, that could never be, as long as the Lord does not forsake the earth. Indeed not, for he must have a people in whom to confide his truth, and by whom to save those who choose to go his way. So, those who choose to go some other way will in the end discover that the devil, not the Lord, is behind them, and that hell, not the kingdom, is ahead of them.
Oh yes. So this is often worth repeating. It says, indeed not, for he must have a people in whom to confide his truth, and by whom to save those who choose to go his way.
Amen.
So in every age, God has a people. He has a messenger and the people who participate in the spreading of that message. And it's one people, and those who choose to go any other way, unfortunately, they'll discover that they have gone astray. The same illustration is also found in Ezekiel chapter 47. We won't read all of the chapter, but it describes a little river which comes out from the altar, and it grows bigger and bigger. And there are some points there which show us that surely there's only salvation in joining the one true movement of the time. Shall we read from 2 SR 292.2? Can you start from where it says, it will be noticed that
as Ezekiel first saw the waters by the side of the altar, they were of little significance in comparison with that which he saw outside the gate. As the Tyne rivulet immediately swells into a mighty river, it represents something of very rapid growth. These waters denote the same as the waters in Revelation 17 verse 15, peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. For the angel said to Ezekiel, which being brought forth into the sea, the waters shall be held. Therefore, these waters represent a very great multitude, which no man could number, that shall be healed from sin and disease, save in the time of the loud cry, through the ministry of the house of David.
Amen. The significance?
The significance is that the church of God, that is house of God, David, is endowed with power from the throne to offer life eternal with no taste of death to those who accept the truth and are willing to become a part of this mighty river.
Right. So the whole issue is not only accepting the truth, but being willing to become a part of this mighty river, being willing to become a part of the house of David, being willing to become a part of the one true movement, which is they proclaiming the last message of the day. Shall we go down a bit where it says the waters that make up this mighty river?
The waters that make up this mighty river represent a multitude of saints endowed with healing power from the throne of God. For the word says, and everything shall live whither the river cometh. This healing is not indefinite, but permanent. For we read, and it shall come to pass that everything that liveth, which moveth, whithersoever the river shall come, shall live.
Right. So we see that wherever the river or the movement comes, those who join it and become a part of it shall live. We've seen it from all the examples which we went through, that even the early Israelite movement, wherever they moved, those who were willing to become a part, they got life. As far into the New Testament, when the Christian message began to spread, those who came in contact with it and joined, they gained life. The same in the last days it is. Those who are willing to become a part of the true movement, the last movement of the day, there is life eternal promised unto us. Shall we read on? But the married places.
But the married places thereof and the marriages thereof shall not be held. They shall be given to salt. The marriages and the married places represent denominations and sects separate of the mad river, and that they shall not be saved or healed.
That's a sad thing, that those who will separate themselves or run separate entities, or want to have the precepts of the message but not be a part of the movement, unfortunately will be left to salt. What does that mean? Turned to salt?
Turned to salt means eternal lost, as was Lot's wife. And as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be also in the days of the Son of Man. Likewise also as it was in the days of Lot, remember Lot's wife.
So we see the sad outcome of those who choose not to be a part of the true movement. We shall read also from Acts of the Apostles, page 9.1.
The church is God's appointed agents for the salvation of men. It was organized for service, and its mission is to carry the gospel to the world.
So that's the appointed agency which God has set up, and there's no other means. That's the method, that's the pattern. We've seen it throughout, and this is how the gospel will reach all the world. From the beginning,
it has been God's plan that through his church shall be reflected to the world his fullness and his sufficiency. The members of the church, those whom he has called out of darkness into his marvelous light, are to show forth his glory. The church is the repository of the riches of the grace of Christ, and through the church will eventually be made manifest even to the principalities and powers in heavenly places, the final and full display of the love of God.
What a lovely responsibility has been placed on the people of God to bear all the riches of the grace of Christ, to reflect the fullness of God's truth, and we can only benefit from all of these if we become a part of that very movement. In closing, we shall hear from 2SR, page 266.1, where we are told about Jacob's dream. I know we've come across that, where Jacob had a dream and there were angels ascending and descending from heaven. And the interpretation is that Jacob's dream was prophetic of a time when there will be a complete connection and constant communication with heaven and earth. That's the loud cry of the third angel's message, and it's also the harvest time. To that glorious church, these words apply. This is the house of God and the gate of heaven. Only by the gospel proclamation through that spiritual house can God save his people. There is to be one fold, one shepherd, one Lord, one truth to embrace, one salvation to accept, one road to travel, one gate to pass through, one train to take, one time to depart, one heaven to enter, one people, and one holy family. There can be no other way. So may God help us as we meet the truth, to have the wisdom, to discern the messenger, to discern the messengers, the bearers of the truth of the time, and to be willing to be a part of that movement so that we benefit from the salvation and also be able to share that many others also be saved. May God bless the reading of his word.